Hey everybody, it's Chris Fleming. This is June 2017. Welcome back to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. This is going to be great, exciting. Our guest this month has researched and collected experiences on paranormal and spiritual topics for the past 2 decades. Now, previously, he was an investigating official of the U.S. government who maintained a top-secret security clearance during many years at one of the major 3-letter agencies. Now, he labored in the fields of global war on terrorism and the war on drugs. Currently, he serves as author and chief editor of the Age of Mass Awakening books. Please welcome to the show the real-life X-Men and collector of the X-Files, John Desouza. I'm very excited to have you on the show, John.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I'm very happy to be here. You know, I'm a great admirer of your work, the stuff you've done on Ghost Adventures, Psychic Kids, and Dead Famous, and many others. You know, what I like about your stuff is that you work with the paranormal, but there's always a connection to the spiritual power that people themselves have within themselves and that they need to discover and develop. And I feel like I'll do some of the same work in my books as well. So that's another reason why I really admire your work.
Well, John, thank you very much. That was an incredible compliment, and I really do appreciate that. I don't know what to say next, but you know what I'm going to say is the reason why we're here is for everybody listening. We're going to be discussing with John his experiences and his encounters with extra-dimensional beings, based off of his new book that he has out called The Extra-Dimensionals, True Tales and Concepts of Alien Visitors. Now, aliens has always been a huge integral part of things that I've studied kind of on the side. I've been very intrigued by this. But John, for those that don't know you, don't know your background, give us a little summary, a little history of who you are.
Sure. I was a special agent in the FBI for over 20 years. During that time, I worked a lot of counterterrorism cases, a lot of big high-profile cases like the Unabomber, various terrorist groups and terrorist attacks throughout the country over many years. So it's something that I've been very deeply involved in for many, many years. But during my career in the FBI, I also became aware of many shocking paranormal incidences, events that interjected and became part of sometimes these investigations and cases that would appear to be purely material, but suddenly they would just come to rock solid next level revelations where there was no other answer except for the paranormal answer on these things. And that's why I wrote my books, and that's why I share these experiences today with people.
Well, it's pretty incredible. When you look at, you've been a special agent for over 20 years with the FBI. Was it something that you were allowed to talk about or you weren't allowed to talk about? Did you share that with some of your peers?
No, sure. It was something I've always talked about. I've always been very open about. It's not anything. The things that you actually have to keep secret when you're working secret things in the national security structure of the United States is actually very little. It's very little. You have methods, techniques, and certain communication type material has to be kept secret. Mm-hmm. But basically, I mean, most of what the FBI does is very public. First of all, because they're a criminal agency. So everything that's criminal terrorist tends to end up in a public court, in the court system for prosecutions. And once that happens, everything is public of that. So any obligation to keep anything secret in those cases is completely removed because everything you worked up into that point, like the Unabomber case, for instance. This was a very famous terrorist who was successfully blowing people up for about 19 years, almost 20 years. And he was, that was something that was pursued for decades by not just myself, but many, probably hundreds of law enforcement officers across the country by the time he was towards the end of his period. And maybe some of the things that we worked on to try to catch him may have been secret for a period, but once it goes to a trial, that's a complete public exposure of pretty much all the facts surrounding the case. So that eliminates the obligation on secrecy for that type of thing. So that's why I can talk about a lot, pretty much almost all of the stuff I've worked on during my career for the most part.
You've been also like a para-investigator, and you wrote a book called The Para-Investigators, The Story of Indigo Kids of 9/11. Can you share a little bit about that? Because that interests me, because I had done Psychic Kids. So please tell us.
Yes. And, and people can read that if they just go on my Facebook, or you just Google John Desouza, D like David, Esouza, all small letters, John Desouza. You just Google that and you can find my Facebook, and you can actually go on my Facebook and just get the first 50 pages for free. Wow. And just read them right from Amazon of the Para-Investigators. And that contains within it what was really the first great and shocking experience of the paranormal for myself and a couple of dozen other agents and police officers, which was the experience known as the Indigo Kids of 9/11. Wow. The Indigo Kids of 9/11. And that was simply this case that occurred in the weeks and days just before the 9/11 attacks occurred in New York City. And what they were was it was little kids from like ages of like 5 years old, as young as 5 years old, going up all the way to around 11 or 12 years old, all over the country, dozens and dozens of cases where all of these little kids had precognitive experiences of the events of 9/11. And they weren't reported in by their parents because parents usually won't do that, but they were reported in once 9/11 happened, and there was this huge campaign for see something, say anything, please report in anything at all that could possibly be connected to the terrorist attacks. They were reported in by babysitters, by school bus drivers, by teachers, by other caretaker adults. And, they were reported into all these task forces. They were like FBI mixed with other agencies and regular police officers, these task forces that would receive any of these leads. And they had to go cover them. They had to, no matter how ludicrous the lead was, no matter, even it was way out there. We had to go and cover them and actually ride them out. I mean, investigate them out to the end, no matter what. So for instance, what happened was there was one was a little girl who was on a playground during school recess. Just a little girl playing, sitting by herself in the sand, in the dirt, and she was just tracing outlines in the sand with her finger. And teacher comes over to her and says to her, well, sweetheart, are you okay? What are you? And the little girl says, I'm fine. I'm just thinking. That's all. And so the teacher goes to walk away. The little girl grabs her skirt suddenly, pulls on it violently, and says to the teacher in like a low, raspy voice, tomorrow, make sure you stay away from tall buildings because tall buildings fall down and sometimes they fall on people. And so the teacher pulls away from the little girl, walks away, and just chalks it up to whatever, too much sugar or whatever, doesn't, give it too much thought until 9/11 happens. Right. You see, then that changes everything. Another little boy was in his class doing arts and crafts, doing finger painting. And on my Facebook, I actually have a book trailer of my book that actually shows the actual finger paintings that were done. And this little boy was working hard on this very elaborate painting. And the teacher comes over to him and says, "Wow, this painting is very, very beautiful. These two tall buildings appear to be glowing, and it looks like there's like angels with red wings flying out of these buildings. So what's going on there?" And the little boy says to her, "Those buildings aren't glowing. Those buildings are on fire, and those people aren't angels. Those are people jumping out of the buildings, and they're on fire."
Oh my God.
And again, teacher walks away from a little boy like that and just shrugs it off, doesn't think about it again until a couple of days later, 9/11 happens. Another little boy was on a school bus and apparently didn't get any sleep the night before because he was the last one left. He's dead asleep on the back of the bus. And the bus had emptied out. The school bus driver walks back to go and wake him up. And the little boy is apparently having some kind of seizure or something, because he wakes the little boy up and he wakes up screaming about people being on fire and jumping out of a building. And so, again, the bus driver just wakes the kid up and doesn't think any more about it until 9/11 happens. And like I said, these reports would come in to these task force centers, these anti-terrorism, counterterrorism task force centers, and these would be reported to us, and we would have to go out and interview these and do background checks on the family as well for any sort of connection to terrorism. And all of these cases had to be done. Some of these little kids barely even remembered the experience and didn't want to remember the experience because it was scary to them. And they had to be sat down with their parents, of course, and we had to jog their memories as gently as we could, and no matter how ridiculous the law enforcement officer may have felt, it had to be done. And these kids had to be reminded. And then the families had to be checked. And like I said, there were dozens of these cases across the country. And in every single case, it was always a finding of no connection to terrorism whatsoever, just in case these kids, had overheard something from family or friends and had somehow gained these impressions in the physical world, and that was all investigated out. And every single case was found that there was no connection to terrorism at all, and that the paranormal answer to what happened was the only answer.
See, it's interesting because, what you're stating here, we talk about the collective consciousness, the global consciousness experiment that skyrocketed off the random charts at all major universities,
right?
Prior to 9/11, and then dipped when it happened, basically stating that a great global event was about to occur. And then after it occurred, it dropped down. My listeners know about my experience with 9/11 2 weeks before it happened and the witnesses. I don't need to discuss it on this program. But the one thing I'm going to mention is to compliment.
But yes, you should. I haven't heard it.
Okay.
What is it?
Well, I'll say this real quickly. Is in August of 2001, I was in the mortgage business. We were sitting in the office, and my friend Don had mentioned something about, just like Chris says, World War III is going to happen. And I said, well, it is. He goes, how's it going to start? I said, well, it's going to be a long time before it happens. If it's going to be little wars and this and that. He goes, where? How's it going to start? I said, well, there's going to be a terrorist attack in the United States. And he says, they're not going to attack the United States. I said, yes, the World Trade Center is going to be hit by missiles. They're going to be completely destroyed. And that is going to start wars in the Middle East, which is going to lead to a world war. He says, when is this going to happen? I said, I don't know. This is going to happen in anywhere from 8 to 16 months. It happened 2 weeks later.
Wow.
And the thing is I don't even know where it came from for me to say this. I just said it. After it happened, there was 3 individuals in the room that witnessed what I said. So the day it happened, they all looked at me and they said, you were right. And I forgot what I said. So I went outside crying. But about a month later, Rick had said, you know what, Chris, you told me this in June, 2 months before August. You said that planes were going to go into tall buildings in New York. And I said, Rick, I don't remember. So sometimes we will channel things that we just don't know. Whether it can be through dreams, it can be through just conversation or collective energy we receive. And it has to do with a major event that's going to affect all of us. My cousin, Laura, her daughter, Molly, was about 8 years old when 9/11 occurred. That very evening, night before, she woke up in the middle of the night, middle of the morning, crying that she had a nightmare. Now, understand children see things differently culturally, but she was saying that she had a dream that Mexicans were flying planes into buildings and people were dying. And, the next morning, Laura gets up, everybody gets up, turn on the news, and there's what happened. So, and Molly has had many other experiences of precognition of prior things, but she was 8 years old when this occurred, and they do tend to say that psychic abilities or psychic awareness does run in families through generations. So to complement what you said, I mean, I'm intrigued by this, and I mean, this could be a whole nother topic at another time that we talk about, and it's fascinating, and I really believe it's untouched. There is a book called Messages that is about certain individuals that had messages prior to 9/11, and some of them didn't pay heed to it, didn't listen to it, and they died in the building, but they knew they were going to die, and some of them avoided going to the building that day, and they survived, and that's in the book Messages. Your book, The Para-Investigators, covers some of these stories and has several other stories about paranormally gifted investigators also. Now, why are you called the X-Men? Because, as everybody knows, it's the superheroes, Cyclops, Wolverine, and everything like that. And I'm a big comic book fan of the X-Men as well. But, I mean, such a unique name. Why X-Men?
It's a shortening of the nickname, the X-Files Man, which is the nickname that I picked up in the 90s. We had a situation in the FBI when the show The X-Files went on the air, and it created some a minor scandal in the FBI. There was a situation where the higher ups they figured out that some of the cases that were being done in the X-Files were taken from real life FBI cases. And so what they did was they called up the creator, Chris Carter, and they questioned him on who in the FBI he's been having contact with, if anyone. And I was also questioning because I was known to be a very great fan of the show. And Chris Carter was able to – Chris Carter at the time, he said that he believed they were going to shut him down because they were very vociferous about this. And he said basically that he was getting information from retired FBI agents, which is perfectly fine, but it was on procedure only. And if they had any particular cases that they thought were that they would have to tell him what cases they wanted to know about, and he would tell them the sources for the information on the cases. And they couldn't reveal the cases that were involved because that would give away the whole store, basically. Mm-hmm. So it was just ended up, and I was able to, during this time, I was able to tell them that I was not the person who was giving them an information. But again, if they wanted to tell me what cases they're talking about, I would look at those and see if if I had anything to do with those cases, any involvement with them. And again, they couldn't reveal what cases they were talking about because that would give away the whole thing. So basically, everybody retreated to their own corners, and Chris Carter said he felt like he dodged a bullet, and he was able to go on with the X-Files. However, at the time, I was told by my superiors that due to my love for the X-Files, that I was demoted from G-Man to X-Man. Wow. And so that's and word got out, and I kind of got that. I got that nickname, the X-Man or X-Files Man or the X-Man for short. That was and that kind of stuck with me after that. And it was not a compliment at all.
I understand. I think it's pretty cool. Now about your new book, The Extra-Dimensionals. How is this book? Now this book just came out?
Yes, came out about 12 months ago.
Okay, fantastic. Is it available on a digital download as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Available on Amazon.
Great. Oh, great. I'm gonna pick one up on Amazon so I can read on some of my trips coming up to the UK. I'm excited to read this. Now, how is your book different from some of the other books that are out there about alien visitors?
Oh, I can tell you, it's radically, radically different. And the reason is because of information that I got from, of all places, I got from the FBI. And that's what really started the genesis of my book. Because there is a communication that was written by an FBI supervisor that I have in my hands, and I presented in my book. It's an actual FBI communication that reveals a lot of conclusions about alien visitors to Earth that were never talked about previously, and that even today in the UFO community are not accepted or even looked at. And I'll tell you what a few of them are. And this is why my book is extremely different. Because number one, alien visitors are real, of course. Mm-hmm. They are visiting the Earth constantly, all the time, constantly. Number two, alien visitors they're not like us. They're not like human beings in any way. They are not physical. They are not from outer space. They are not from our physical outer space. They're not from a few galaxies away. They are actually from other levels, other dimensions of existence. They are from outside our physical reality. They are coming from other dimensions, like the way you would think of Star Trek beaming down to the planet, that sort of thing. They are actually just beaming in here. That is because, again, they're not like human beings. They're not cramming themselves into little metal shells and sailing across our physical space to arrive here. That's not what the case is at all. They are not physical. They change their vibration from where they are. They change their vibration.
I understand that part, yeah.
Yeah, to match our lower vibration. Mm-hmm. And that's how they are here physically for short periods of time. But at some point, they lose that, whatever that vibratory rate is, they lose that and they go back to where it is they came from. Also, UFOs themselves, they are not made of metal. Also, they are empty. There's nobody, the real UFOs I'm talking about, of course. Mm-hmm. The ones that are actually unexplainable and very possibly extraterrestrial. Those UFOs have no one inside of them because they are themselves, they are living sentient creatures. They come here they beam in here actually with alien visitors. Mm-hmm. And they just beam in here. They don't sail across our galaxies. They beam in here and they accompany alien visitors, kind of like you would with your golden retriever. And they carry out limited small tasks for the alien visitors. The most obvious one, of course, is their main task, which is to come and scan all of us, to collect that DNA print, that soul print of each person, bring it back to the alien visitors to see, like a golden retriever retrieving something and bringing it back to his master. And they bring this information, this data, back to alien visitors, and alien visitors decide how to proceed from there. And those are also UFOs they're not made of metal. They're made out of a radiant type of energy. And the nearest we can understand is plasma, like plasma that can phase. UFOs, yeah. Yes, that can phase between the light state, the gaseous state, and the non-solid state, and again back to solid state.
Well, then let me stop you right there and ask you a question because I remember when I was publishing a magazine, Unknown Magazine, in the 90s, and I interviewed some people, especially some people in Arizona and stuff, and they talked about these light ships, these plasma ships that would go in and out of dimensions, yes. And that some of these crafts were also some type of living organism, so to speak. Now, I've seen quite a few UFOs, and when I say UFOs, they're clearly not either man-made or they're back-engineered or there's something. And I just witnessed one about a month ago to where it was probably about 5, 6 in the evening. It wasn't dark out yet. The sun was just starting to go down, and something about when these objects are in the sky, people that are highly in tuned can feel it, can recognize it. So I looked up and I saw this cigar-shaped craft. And I looked at this and I thought maybe it was just some type of anomaly of a cloud, but then I saw it moving and I saw it go through a cloud. Then it completely disappeared and it reappeared somewhere else within a second. I called a friend of mine because I was in my car driving, called a friend of mine, told him to look westbound. I said, "You see the 3 bright lights in the sky?" I go, "Yeah." I go, "Well, those are planes." I said, "Look to the right of those 3 bright lights. Do you see something odd?" And he says, "Oh my God." He goes, "I see something, it's like a cylinder, a long-shaped cylinder." I said, "Exactly." He goes, "What the hell is that?" We watched it for 10 minutes, slowly move, then disappear, reappear. And when it reappeared, it was pushing through a cloud that was creating a trail. And as this cloud created a trail, it evaporated. Then this thing elongated, and then it completely vanished. And this was for a solid 10 minutes. We both corresponded back and forth on the phone witnessing this. I was actually a little scared after seeing that, even though I have seen other UFOs before. I saw a big light ship that was yellow, red, and white that flew over this parking lot. This thing was huge, and I was with my girlfriend Jennifer at the time back in '99, and we witnessed this. And then I was driving once in traffic. Sky was completely clear for maybe just one or two clouds within range. And I felt someone staring at me, no different than someone pulling up beside you in a car. But that sensation, that intuition, compelled me to look upwards, lean forward on the dash of the car and look up. And there was this hat-shaped black object in the sky. Soon as I looked at it, I had the sensation and feeling just like when you catch someone staring at you and they go, oh shit, he's looking at me, and they turn away. This thing then glided quickly with this smooth transition behind the only cloud that was out there, this tiny cloud, and it never came back out. I pulled over to the side of the road on I-90 Expressway, and I was going west, passed through Schaumburg. I got out of while there was rush hour traffic, I got out on the side of the road, and I continued to look up. For a good 15 minutes, this thing never reappeared. I went everything in my head. It was a giant eagle. No way. This thing's huge. It's not a plane because I've lived near O'Hare for my whole life. I know planes, and they do not move that fast, and they're not solid black in broad daylight. So just with these, and there's a couple more. Seeing them in Mexico with the film crew, we saw them make 90-degree turns and this and that. And then I took a flashlight, and I shined the flashlight, turned it off and on, and all of a sudden this glowing
No,
thing.
don't do that. No, don't do that.
Well, it glowed back. It illuminated brighter back, like in communication. Wow. The whole crew, and Chris Bozak, who worked on Psychic Kids and other shows, he didn't believe in UFOs, didn't believe in anything. After I did that, he was mind blown. He says, in all my years, there's no way we have any type of device or craft that can make a 90-degree turn, nor be consciously aware of us, and you blink a flashlight, and it's up in space, and it shines back.
Yeah.
He goes,
they're alive. They're alive. That's what that's all about.
So what you're saying here with the extra dimensionals, now these are a different type of beings that do work with these other physical aliens, or is it something that's
those are the UFOs, which are the real ones that people see. Mm-hmm. But they're not craft.
Okay.
They're not buses like we would need. Okay. Because alien visitors don't need transportation like we do. Wow. They don't get on a metal bus and get sailed from place to place, shuffled from place to place. That's not how it works. You know, Roswell was not real. It was real, but it wasn't true. And these alien visitors, these UFOs are themselves sentient beings. They are sentient beings. And their job is to go scope you out, to look at you and to see if you're interested in them and if they're interested in you. You know, like a dog, that comes up to you and sniffs you to see how you are, if you're friendly or not friendly. And so I tell people, I tell people, when you're confronted with the real deal, don't flash your flashlight at it, and don't put your arms up in like sort of like a longing diamond kind of shape above your head, because those are the signals for I want you to take me. Mm-hmm. And people have been taken for doing stuff like that, especially the flashing of the flashlights. We had a huge incident at the Allegheny. I think it was the Allegheny 4. Four individuals who were out camping, and people can Google this.
I'm familiar with this case. Yes.
And what was their terrible sin was they saw this plasma vehicle, and it was just above the tree lines as they were on the river, just paddling, and they're just like fascinated with this thing. And one of them gets the bright idea, let me flash my flashlights at it. And it was like calling a dog. I mean, as soon as he did that, the thing started coming after them, and they tried to paddle to shore, and they just couldn't paddle fast enough. That thing just took them. And of course, they were on shore later, but they had like 9 hours of missing time, and their clothing was on backwards and inside out and stuff. And so that's why I tell people, don't flash your flashlights at it. Don't do that. Don't put your arms up in a longing gesture either, because people have disappeared. And once it happens, that's it. You can't take that back.
Would you think, and based on the experience you have and the knowledge you have in your research and your investigations, that they have figured out, obviously, interdimensional travel, but they've also figured out, quantum physics, particles, how all particles are connected through time and space, and that because of that connection, they can open up doors, wormholes, wherever they want?
Absolutely. And one of the things I say in my book, The Extra Dimensionals, is that it appears from all the cases that I've seen and from everything that I have reviewed, it appears that the Earth is primarily not a planet. It is primarily a portal, a doorway, a giant portal. And secondarily, it is a planet. There's a movie out now that says the city of 1,000 planets, Valerian. That's it, Valerian, the city of 1,000 planets, which is based on some old French graphic novel. It looks like a great movie, but what I say is that the Earth is the planet of 1,000 galaxies, but here's the trick. The mind-blowing part is Earth is the planet of 1,000 galaxies, but none of those galaxies are ours. In other words, it looks like there's just in our space, in our physical space, there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there. That's what it looks like to me, because these beings are not sailing here from the next few galaxies over. And yet there are alien visitors constantly transiting in and out of our Earth all the time. They're coming from other places, from other galaxies, not from ours.
Right.
That's my conclusion. I've seen.
You still there? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I lost you for a second. I agree with you on that based on some of my research. There's some things I want to say and I can't say, but I need to think here for a second.
Why not? Were you in the FBI too?
No. No,
Are you
John,
a secret CIA
John,
guy?
I can't release certain information, No, just to be careful some of the things I said because I haven't gone public with a few things. But the one thing I want to say is in a lot of my research that there's the belief that there are many different species, many different types of entities, alien beings. I'm familiar with the reptilians, the draconians, and I became familiar with a few years ago the whites, the tall whites that Charles Hall talks about in Millennial Hospitality. And I think the defense prime minister from Canada had also come forward and spoken about the whites, that the whites are working with our military. And I have to mention this, is I had purchased, I had actually talked to Charles Hall on the phone. I wanted to do an interview. He didn't want to do an interview. But I had ordered the books, and I had two of the books, and I started reading them. And I think they're a little too long to actually read. But during the times I was reading them at night, I became very intrigued by his stories. I started hearing and reading about him making contact with these white beings. Lo and behold, I started seeing the corner of my eye in my bedroom with the lights on, these white vertical shafts of light that started to appear on different sides of my room. And every time I would look back down on the book, these things would reappear in movement, and then I would get the psychic sensation. There's obviously I'm being watched and there's someone in the room. I've always known that entities of varying degrees and dimensions can tap into and are very familiar with long-distance consciousness, such as an awareness, no different than when we pray from a long distance, it's received in the other side by spirit. But yet that these entities are somehow able to consciously be aware of when we're thinking of them or what we're doing. And lo and behold, I'm seeing these white lights, tall vertical white lights that were appearing in the room. And the conclusion I had and the assumption was, because they weren't familiar to me of anything I've seen before, such as ghosts or spirits, that I was under the impression that because I was so into this book and such thinking about it, that somehow there was some type of connection to where they were actually becoming present.
Using your consciousness.
It was crazy.
As a rope to pull themselves in. Yeah.
It was literally crazy.
I believe that. I do. And it connects back to something that you said, that I wanted to add to, which is that you have had these experiences with these UFOs, and I've seen this across so many cases, including my own when I was a kid, and I had my own contact experiences. Is that you see these UFO vehicles, you see these UFOs in real incidences, and there's a spiritual perception component to it, where you, for instance, feel that this thing is watching you, not because the things inside of it are watching you, but because the thing itself is watching you, and you feel that perception, you feel that feeling that we all get when you're just being directly observed by somebody who's just out of your peripheral, and then you look at them, and then they pretend they're not looking, and you've had that feeling with these UFOs, and I have also where I feel, and even when, for instance, I had my UFO experience, there's a spiritual component to it where, even though I never saw the UFO do these crazy 90-degree angles or any movements that proved to me it was not human, I could feel it was not of this world. I could feel it in the spiritual perception. There was something non-human about it, about the thing that was observing me, and I just felt that. And that's why there's a huge component in ufology that say, all these UFOs are part of the military-industrial complex. This is breakaway technology that's used by the elite powers in control, and they use this as part of secret space program, and that's what they are. Or there's other people. There's another segment that says that these are humans from the future, and that's what they. And I don't believe that the observations that I've seen or that you have seen, I don't believe they are a human at all. I don't believe they are of the military-industrial complex, because there's that spiritual component to it.
Correct.
Where you feel it in your soul that this is something otherworldly, non-human. You can just feel it. And I've seen that in so many people across all of these cases, that non-human component that they just perceive. And that's something that you point to very, very well as well.
You state here is one more thing I want to add to that, and I want to get into more about your book to share with the listeners, is one of the most shocking experiences I had about 6 years ago, which I did speak about publicly, was I had read a book by Whitley Strieber, The Key. And in reading The Key, some higher intelligent being communicates with me as a dialogue back and forth, talking about various things. I asked to the universe, a couple of days after completing the book, I would love to have this experience where I come in contact with some type of being that is super intelligent or whatever. Lo and behold, I got my answer about 2 nights later. I wake up at 5 in the morning, and and I'm laying on my back, and I wake up. My eyes are faced right at the door to my bedroom. Standing in the doorway is this celestial figure. This figure is wearing this cloak that is somewhat pearlescent. It's a cat. It's a cat person, a human body, but the face of a cat. And I was startled and terrified at first because, to see some type of half animal, half human is pretty startling. But the thing about it was wearing this crown that was adorned with all these jewels. And it had this little V-neck type thing that went around with all these glorious, beautiful type of emeralds, jewels, diamonds. And it looked at me, and when I just had this feeling looking at this, that this thing was super ancient, it was intelligent, it was well aware of all dimension, time, and space. And as it stood there, it was standing there for some specific purpose, just to acknowledge what I had asked. And I looked at this at first, I was terrified, and then that went away. It blinked. And then it slightly turned, and as it started to walk away, it vanished as if it was going into some other dimensional space. Now, I closed my eyes because I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I saw this. And I opened it back up, and there was nothing there. And I jumped out of bed, and I went in the hallway, and I was completely shocked because it completely was out of my paradigm to experience something like that. I don't know what else to say but that. That's all I know.
Yeah, that's an extra dimensional experience right there. It speaks to directly the thesis of my book, that these are alien visitors that are bleeding over into our physical space from other dimensions, and they just go back. And it's that individual, that visitor that you got there may have downloaded some stuff into you at that time that maybe you weren't aware of at that moment, but that is unfolding itself even as we speak. So that's because they are not like humans.
Right.
They don't communicate like us. They don't travel like us. They don't do anything like us. And unfortunately, most of ufology is just trying to cram and shoehorn the idea of alien visitors into our human ideas of ourselves. And it just doesn't work. It doesn't apply. And that's why the extra dimensional hypothesis is gaining a lot of attention in the last year or so.
Now, John, you've had a lot of interest and passion for this because you had an experience when you were younger.
Yeah, that is true. I was about 9 years old when I was with my parents at a party in New York City. There was like a rental hall with some kind of a wedding reception. And there were hundreds of people in this rental hall, and it was late at night. It was way past my bedtime. It was about 1 a.m. And me and a bunch of other little kids found each other, and we decided to just run out into the night with no supervision, and we just spilled out into the night. And the streets were deserted. It was probably not the best, not a good neighborhood for little kids to be running around wild in the streets. We were playing tag, we were playing Rigolevio, and one of the kids, was getting really spirited, and one of the kids hit me in the stomach. And I just fell down on the sidewalk, and and one of the kids said, "Oh, he's really hurt." So they all screamed and ran back to the building, left me there. And I was just looking up at the sky. It was a beautiful starry night. And I was just looking up at the sky, and there was one spot between the two tallest buildings I'd ever seen so far up to that time. And there was one spot between the two tall buildings that was completely black. It was blacked out. And there was no stars. And I just kept looking closer at that spot, that it was like a big space. And I got on my feet and looked closer at it. And some lights started coming out, like spotlights started coming out the bottom of this black cloud. It was like a black cloud, like an ink cloud, like kind of squid would give off in the water. You're trying to catch them with your hand. And this giant cloud gave way at the bottom to this, and it would look like an old-fashioned flying saucer coming out the bottom there with the lights spinning in the bottom. And this thing starts coming towards me. And I'm just standing looking at it. And I felt that spotlight. The spotlight, I've heard many, many witnesses talk about this spotlight since that time. And there was this greenish, bluish kind of spotlight that just goes right through you. And just you feel it all the way down to the cells of your body. It just seems to just be going right through you, and it feels like it's just collecting everything on you. And I just kept looking up at the thing, and two teenage girls appeared on my left, and they were screaming and looking up at the same thing I was looking up at. And one of them, and they were hugging each other and trying to look up at the same time. And one of them yells at me, "Little boy, you better run home. The world might be ending." And then they disappeared, and then I kind of took a step back out of the spotlight, and it was like me and the saucer changed our mind at the same moment. And I stepped back out of the thing, and the thing reversed course and went back up towards the cloud, back into the cloud, and just, then the cloud itself disappeared. And I just ran back to that hall, tried to tell my parents in front of other people, and my parents did not want to hear about it in front of other people. But later I told them what happened, and my mother, told me about not talking about paranormal topics in front of regular people. Not a good idea.
John, you're so intriguing. I just want to sit here and listen to all your stories. I mean, I don't even know what to say. And I said this earlier because you speak with such authority. You're a great speaker, by the way, as well. And
Thank you.
It's interesting. Now, you refer yourself as to a new voice in the paranormal. Why is that?
Because in the paranormal ufology in particular, we basically have just been spinning wheels and just going over the same paradigms and tossing back and forth the same information for like 50 years. There's been like no movement, and people are in this area are still begging the mainstream to believe in that UFOs are real. That's where we're still right there after 50 years. And what I try to say, I'm a new voice in the paranormal because for one thing, I want to change the language of the paranormal, which has been very carefully controlled by the elite powers in control, by people who have a great vested interest in making sure that the paranormal is very controlled. And so that's why they come up with these ludicrous labels that they popularize with global media, like UFO or like Bigfoot, or whatever the latest silly appellation is, because UFO conveys nothing except a sense of uncertainty. I always suggest a new lexicon, new labels that we should use for, instead of UFOs. I always urge people to use plasmas. Let's start referring to these things as plasmas, and that's because that's for a specific reason. Because I want to have a better understanding, a little more certainty in our language. Bigfoot should be referred to as just crypto creature or any other label that doesn't appear quite as ludicrous, and that's the thing about not just a new voice, but new words, new lexicon, new way of referring to things, because the elite powers in control have a huge interest in keeping the paranormal very limited. And the reason is because they know it's true, and they use these things to their advantage. And it is vital for them to keep the mainstream from actually believing, from actually knowing that these things are true, because that gives them more room to maneuver and more room to use all of these things to their advantage. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, that's understood. I mean, what do you want people to know about UFOlogy?
I want them to know that it's coming to a head very soon. We are quickly approaching a crescendo, a climax, because we are getting to the point now where it is becoming very accepted all over the earth that UFOs are real. They are extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, and that alien visitors are real. And so we're losing a lot of the wonder, and alien visitors cannot tolerate that. They're going to have to step up their game. They're going to have to increase the shock and awe factor. I just told you that, a lot of times people who are out doing UFO hunting, they feel like they're safe. They feel like they're safe because they're in a big group. And so I see people doing that all the time. So that's why.
But I know how preposterous it is to have that mentality for people
exactly.
to think they're safe when these things are interdimensional.
Yes, exactly. And that's why if you can read the last 20 pages of my book, The Extra-Dimensionals, without screaming, then you're a better man than I am, because one of the things, I revealed many things that we're coming to very, very soon. And one of the things is mass abductions. And when I say mass abductions, I'm talking about because they need to up the ante. Alien visitors need to increase that awe and wonder factor, which is being lost right now. It's being lost because this is so commonplace. Right. It's so commonplace that you have bunches of these humans sitting around flashing their flashlights at us with no concern about anything. Mm-hmm. And that's not going to work for them. It's not going to work for them. They're going to have to step it up. And one of the things I'm looking for to be happening very soon is mass abduction. I'm talking about hundreds of people at a time, or perhaps even whole towns, entire towns of people just disappearing because they've been abducted by aliens, and maybe being returned, maybe not. I don't know. But anyway, that's just one of the many things I reveal as my final reveals in my book that I think we're coming up to very, very soon. And that's what I want people to prepare for. That's why I want people to educate themselves about what extra dimensionals are and what the alien visitor agenda is. Because I'll tell you, because of course, one of the main questions I always get is, are aliens evil? Are they bad? And the answer, of course, is yes and no. Because we obviously see there is a malevolent agenda going forward. I mean, if you listen to any of the interviews from Betty and Barney Hill from 1961, had the first classic abduction that pretty much the pattern is followed ever since then. But those are malevolent acts. They are involuntary and they are malevolent acts. But also, I've talked to other witnesses that have had contact with alien visitors, like you had with that individual that visited you that time, where they're very benevolent. They're very benevolent contacts. They bring messages that uplift people, that are positive. I've talked to witnesses who have been healed of very serious diseases by alien visitors. It's happened, and I know they were telling the truth. I know I can see their medical records, and they can prove that they have been healed. This is real. So that's a benevolent alien visitor right there. And so what I tell people is we have both. There is some kind of malevolent alien agenda that is tied up to the elite powers in control on the earth. But there's also benevolent ones that are seeking only to help us. And we need to learn what is really going on so we can reach out to the good ones and very much avoid the negative ones. That's what we need to do. That's always my final message to people.
You state something interesting in your book, The Extra Dimensionals, when it says stories and concepts. What do you mean by that?
Well, because I always put true stories of things that have actually happened to people in my usually very well documented stories. I go over the Travis Walton case, for instance.
Yeah, I've met him. Very nice guy on a couple occasions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and he's and I also, and his case continues to evolve and change 40 years later because he's realized several things that I have also put in my book that he didn't know. He didn't know years ago. There was a witness to his case that was a person who was actually in the forest and took polygraphs to prove that they were telling the truth about what they were doing. They were hunting in the forest at night. They came out of the forest and they looked to their left and they saw a truck full of Travis's friends peeling out in a truck down the road, creating a huge dust cloud. That's what they saw. And then they looked to their left, and they saw a very young, very skinny white man dressed in logger's clothing appeared to be dead or unconscious, being floated up into the bottom of a ship, a UFO. And when I heard this testimony, it captured my imagination. I put it on the cover of my book. So if you go right now on Amazon, look at the cover of my book. It is that exact scene that witness who came forward. He was a member of the military, and he came forward and said this is exactly what he saw that night. And he went to and it's on the cover of my book, The Extra Dimensionals. And he went and he told his superior officer, can I tell the cops that I saw this? And his superior officer said, no, let's wait and see if they get indicted for murder. Jeez. And if they get indicted for murder, which actually was being prepared to happen, because the cops and the FBI and everybody else, they were all preparing, and state police, they were preparing to indict them for murder. When Travis, of course, showed up 5 days later, he was dropped off in a place that had already been searched, and there he was. So the murder indictment was off the table, and so this witness, this new kind of witness, came forward and actually showed Travis his polygraph results showing that he was telling the truth about what he saw. However, when Travis did the background checks on this person, this member of the military, It came back that he was associated to debunker groups that had been persecuting Travis for many years. So for that reason, Travis never accepted him as one of the witnesses in his group.
Wow. Are there any paranormal beliefs that you consider debunked?
You know, I've always had doubts about the Mothman sightings, because there was a period in the 70s when Mothman was very intense and had a lot of witnesses that supposedly came forward, but then just disappeared. And there has not been credible, reliable testimony on Mothman ever since. And when I talk about that in my book, that there's such a thing as continuous perception of consciousness with these paranormal phenomena. In other words, the continued perception of paranormal phenomena is the highest kind of evidence of their actual existence. In other words, Loch Ness Monster, for instance, in Scotland, I believe that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. No matter how much scientific debunking, you can go take all kinds of machinery and do all kinds of sonar tests, but for 1,000 years, people have been seeing this thing during recorded history. That's only during recorded history. And it doesn't go away. And so that continual perception, consciousness of that paranormal phenomena, I think, is the best evidence that it is real. It absolutely is real, even if it's on an extra dimensional level. In other words, maybe those paranormal phenomena are actually disappearing back to a different dimension and then reappearing back here for short periods of time. And that's possible too.
John, I want to add something because you mentioned about the Mothman, and this is something obviously, some cases with certain entities or beings. There's cases here and there that are in the public domain, and then there's certain cases that we never hear about. So we don't know if they've ever reappeared or this thing's ever existed. I want to share with you and the listeners a few months ago. An acquaintance, because I'm not that great friends with him. I do know his girlfriend through a friend of mine. Text messaged me that he saw something that scared the hell out of him. He doesn't believe that much in ghosts, but what he saw, he has no explanation, so he reached out to me and asked me, what the hell was this? He was driving down a street in the suburbs of Chicago. I forget exactly what town. I think it was off of Addison or something. He said he saw this dark black figure that was on the side of the road. It was very tall. He said as he was driving closer to it, he started slowing down because he says, first I thought it was some type tall tree or whatever. It started to walk across the street with this gate. All of a sudden, these giant black wings came out of it, and it flew away like a giant bat.
Wow.
He said it was huge. He says it wasn't, we're talking like a human being, huge, even bigger than that. And I said, I don't know, geez. And so, ironically, months later, and I've always been wanted to go to that location, film him talking about it, and do some drawings to figure out exactly what he saw. Ironically, a couple months later, on my friend's show, Darkness Radio, he interviewed somebody that talked about a sighting of what they believe was the Mothman in Lincoln Park in Chicago not too long ago. They described the same features that appear to be similar to the Mothman. This is a completely different sighting. And I know the guy, John, has not told anybody publicly about his experience. He only came to me because I'm into this, because he thinks people will think he's crazy. So now we have 2 sightings within the last 6 months that have occurred, and these areas are only about an hour difference. So what is going on? What is it that these people are seeing? Is it related to the Mothman, or is it just something that's similar, that's completely different? I don't know. And and if you're always interested, I can get you his information and you can talk to him. I don't know what you've got some books you're working on next. What are you working on next?
I'm working on a book called The Clear Hearers about the existence of a great voice of authority, guidance, upliftment that comes to people and gives them very short, terse commands, advice, help when they need it the most, usually during times of crisis. And it's my investigation into these cases, into the history of the great voice, and really just tracking down what this thing is and why it helps people, what it does for them, what's the purpose.
Well, that's great. I look forward to that, and I'd love to have you on the show in the future once you've completed that, because I'm a big proponent of infinite intelligence, of your intuition, your higher consciousness, giving you messages, giving you voice to complete the next step that you're supposed to, whether it's to warn you of impending danger or to instill opportunity and let you know that something very important is coming you need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Before we end here, John, what is your favorite saying in the paranormal, and what is your least favorite term?
My favorite saying in the paranormal is, I know what I saw.
That's great.
And my least favorite saying is, let's science it away.
Let's science it away.
Yeah.
Well, John, I want to thank you so much for being on this show. You're a fantastic guest. For everybody listening, you can check out his book, The Extra-Dimensionals, True Tales and Concepts of Alien Visitors, on Amazon. Also his other book, The Para-Investigators. You can check out his website, johntama.books.com. That's JOHNTAMABOOKS.com. Anything else you'd like to add, John?
No, Chris, I love your work. Great. Please continue what you're doing. And it's all terrific. And good luck in the UK with the filming that you're doing out there.
Well, thank you so much, John. You as well. And I look forward to your future works and having you on again on Spirit Talk.
Oh, this.
For everybody listening, this is Chris Fleming and John Desouza. You've been listening to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. I'll see you next month.